Okay, so this is video 2 on the ism series, and we're going to look today at liberalism. I'm using some of Miss Pojer's um, PowerPoints, and I'm going to use some of my own notes as well. Don't forget to be looking at your Mercado notes. Don't forget to be looking at your textbook for extra information, but this should definitely help us on our way. So, first, liberalism. What do we need to know about liberalism? So, as you can see in front of you, the words used when the term was adopted by the Spanish political party, the Liberales, in 1812. And the roots of liberalism come from two very different traditions of English and French political thought. England, John Locke; Adam Smith; France, Rousseau; and the guy by the name of Francois Rousseau. John Locke, my buddy, we remember him. The contract theory of government regarding the state as a human construction established by an original contract. Contract meaning between the people and the government, that they both have a responsibility to each other. He believed in a limited constitutional government, civil society of free men equal under the rule of law, bound together by no common purpose, but sharing respect for each other's rights. He believed in natural rights. He said they were life, liberty, and property, and he linked private property with individual liberty. Adam Smith, now this is a new name for us. He wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations, and he adds an economic dimension to liberalism. He merges Locke's ideas of civil society with economic theory. He believed in free trade economics. What is that? Well, laissez-faire, laissez-faire. Laissez-faire means no government intervention in social and economic affairs, no matter what. Hands down, no questions. He saw the invisible hand where a benevolent God administered a universe in which human happiness was maximized. He believed that people will be just fine on their own and that the government does not have to tell them what to do. He is really opposed to mercantilism and the money made over the money made by the government from colonization. He's going to define the laws of production, and those laws of production being land, labor, and capital. Land, labor, and capital, meaning you have to have property to make money, you need to have workers to make money, and you need the money to start a business in order to make money. A different guy, similar ideas having to do with liberalism, is a guy by the name of John Stuart Mill. He wrote a book called On Liberty in 1859. John Stuart Mill sometimes is thought to have his own ism, and that's utilitarianism. And he believed that government should be working for the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. He believed that absolute freedom of opinion, protection against tyranny of the majority and censorship, and he fought for women's rights. He believed whatever was best for the most amount of people is what's actually best for everybody. These are just a couple of things he wrote about in On Liberty. He was not crazy about just the individual freedom. He thought all people should be working for the betterment of the entire society. He believed the sole purpose of government was self-protection, that the government should be protecting the people and protecting the government so no one else can take it over. He believed the government may only coerce others in self-defense. He believed we should maximize human development for a more equal society. So just a couple of the things, like I said: emancipation of women, redistribution system of wealth, confiscation of excess profits, abolishing the wage system. This is actually a very socialist idea and a very Marxist idea that we'll talk about a little later. He believed that workers should own the factories and elect the managers. Remember, what's best for the many should be best for the few. And that there would be organized interest groups. These are just a couple of the people, and other Other men associated with liberalism, David Ricardo, who passed something called the Iron Law of Wages. He believed that as long as there were many, many workers, that wages would remain low. This is bad for workers and good for employers, and basically confirms the fact that anyone is replaceable in this system. Thomas Malthus believed that eventually the human population would outstrip the food supply, leading to famine and death. So these are just some of the ideas that came forward. Besides John Stuart Mill being utilitarianism, there was also a man by the name of Jeremy Bentham, and he believed all laws should be based on the greatest happiness of the people as well. Some examples of liberalism that we can see in England. Important legislation. The Catholic Emancipation Act of 1829, which basically said that any Catholics can now be elected to Parliament. Don't forget, England was a Protestant nation, and Catholics had limited rights for a good amount of time. Going into the 1800s, we see the Catholics receiving more rights. We see the Reform Act of 1832 and the Factory Act of 1833. Both had to do with working conditions and the improving of working conditions. The Corn Laws were repealed in 1846. Remember, we saw the Corn Laws as an example of conservatism. The repeal of those laws is kind of the fight back from liberalism. There are many other acts. There's the Poor Laws of 1834, which is going to be kind of like welfare relief for poor people. The Mines Act, which limited time working in the mines, as well as the ages of people allowed to work in mines. The 10-hour law of 1847, which restricted working hours of children. The Reform Bill of 1867, which allowed many people in England the right to vote, even though Representation of People Act will not be passed until 1884, and that's with universal male suffrage. Some of the people that we see rising during this time would be the Whigs, the Whig political party. It is going to be the Liberals to compete with those conservative Tories. They're going to be the champions of liberalism. Charles Earl Grey, he'll be the prime minister a couple of different times throughout the 1800s, and he will be a Whig, and he's going to lead a lot of different reform movements. And yes, they did name a tea after Earl Grey. Women's suffrage will be passed for good in 1928. Another Prime Minister, William Gladstone, will have a long 60-year career in public service, and he'll be Prime Minister a couple of different times as well. And we're also going to see Chartists emerging. Chartists were they were calling for work reform, and not everyone agreed with them, but still we saw these groups emerging. In France, France is interesting because we see a lot of liberalism in France from the French Revolution. You have to remember, the liberals are not revolutionaries. Many people confuse the two, but that's not the case. The liberals in France had to think about a couple of things. How do we end the French Revolution, and how do we reconcile order and liberty in a nation torn apart by civil war? And they had to rethink liberalism because of that. We had Rousseau, right? And these ideas of Rousseau were brought forward, right? His social contract theory of the general will demonstrates an alternative origin of liberalism, right, where he believed that men must resolve problems through our capacity to choose how we ought to live. He believed man was born free and he is everywhere in chains, and that humans are essentially free, but the progress of civilization has substituted subservience to others for that freedom. So he believes that even though men were born free, government has limited them. The general will is a strong and direct form of democracy, but it's only really possible in a relatively small state. So actually, is Rousseau promoting collective tyrannies? He's saying that the many should rule and tell the others what to do. He blatantly rejected representative democracy. Now we're going to have kind of a definition of what liberalism is. All right, couple of things to keep in mind. Liberals favored the idea of the sovereignty of the people, but government should rest on the organized consent of at least the most important sections of the community, and an extension of the franchise to include all men of property. The working class should not be included. In fact, liberals really didn't like people who were poor. They believed that the people with the most money, the people with the most power, should be the ones who are leading everything. They did not believe in nobility or aristocracy, but they did believe that the upper middle class, the people who are running the show, should continue to run the show. They believed maybe a good constitutional monarchy was the best form of government. They valued liberty more than equality, freedom of the press, right to assemble, the confidence in man's powers of self-government. They believed in written constitutions. Like I said, laissez-faire economics, free trade, but they were not for unions. All right. General progress of humanity would emerge from the growth of wealth and from science and inventions. They established churches, and the landed aristocracy were obstacles to the advancement of civilization. Remember what I said? They were not crazy about nobility or aristocracy. They believed that there would be orderly change by legislative process. Remember, the conservatives believed that you shouldn't fix what wasn't broken. They believed that eventually the government would kind of fix itself throughout time. A dislike of wars, conquest, a standing army, and military expenditures, and they hated the idea of revolution. They hated that they might have been connected to the idea of revolution. There were a couple of challenges to liberalism. The conservatives obviously were not crazy about the idea of the change. Also, the idea of the extreme left, which was socialist Marxism. Organized religion wasn't crazy about liberalism. Militarism and imperialism, which are other isms that we'll get to very soon. And there was some economic upheavals. Remember, the Irish potato famine is going to cause massive economic problems in Great Britain, specifically Ireland, but also in England. And there will be some depressions between 1873 and 1896 where there will not be a lot of money in England. A couple of other small things to keep in mind. The French liberal reforms, right? 1791, Jewish rights were given. We had the establishment of the constitutional monarchy after the Congress of Vienna. But later on, the Bourbons will be overthrown in 1830 and replaced with the citizen king, Louis Philippe, who would later be overthrown in 1848. They're going to pass several state constitutions. In 1848, universal male suffrage in France. And later on, the liberal empire of Napoleon III, but we'll get to that in the revolutions and beyond. That's pretty much what we have for liberalism. What I want you to know for your quiz, which will be on Tuesday, is a definition of liberalism, 3 examples of liberalist ideas, and an explanation as to how either the reform bills, the Poor Laws, the Mines Act, how are those liberal legislation. Thank you, guys.